Yes. Hello, everyone. That is a cat. That's Mochi. Mochi's my little buddy. He likes hanging out with me. He just likes to sit next to me. He's my bestest little friend. Aren't you, buddy? Yeah. How come you're so sweet? Yeah. How come you're so sweet? All right. All right, folks. Well, we're still waiting for some people to join up here. We got about 23 so far. Just wanted to let you know I did put in those tests, so your grades should be relatively updated. All right. We got 26 people in here now, I guess. Well, let's get started. So just to give you a little bit of background here on where we're at, where we're headed. Let's just make sure everybody's on the same page here. So last class, yesterday, we learned about the fall of Imperial China. Okay. Can't click on the images in the homework. They should just show up for you. You shouldn't have to click on them. They should just load. You should be able to see them in there. It's just pictures from the pages of the textbook. I just included the textbook pages on there, but they should just load up. I don't think you have to click on anything. Anyhow, so the last class we were learning about the fall of Imperial China, okay? And that was the Qing Dynasty, which had more or less kind of fallen out of favor with a lot of people in China because of the, foreign influence that had happened throughout the 1800s, where a bunch of nations such as Britain and Germany and various others came over and started basically taking over China's ports. And so the Qing emperor is forced out, and we see those two parties of the Kuomintang, the nationalist party, and the Communist Party under Mao Zedong. And these two parties start vying with one another for power over the government of China. And they entered into a civil war with one another, and they're fighting against each other. At first, the nationalists were seemingly doing very, very well, and they had almost eradicated the communists after the long march, where after that 6,000-mile march, the communists had basically been relegated to living in caves in the middle of nowhere in north central China. And it's about that time that the Japanese invade northern China in Manchuria, Manchukuo, and they start making their way down and taking over more land. And we finished up last class talking about how the Chinese Communist Party and the Kuomintang, who had been fighting against each other, realized there's not going to be a China to fight over anymore if they continue fighting and don't address the problem of the Japanese who are now invading. So they set aside their differences. They have a truce for pretty much the entirety of World War II, as Japan is fighting the Allied powers, which China joins in on the Allied power side with the US and Britain and France and Russia. And then the Nazis in Germany are allied with the fascists in Italy and the Japanese, who were also, they're not really Nazis, but they're extremely brutal. And so this is kind of where we left off last class. To kind of further characterize, where we're at right now, we're in the time period. This new unit that we're in is from the time period of 1919 up until 1939, a 20-year time span. Okay, end of World War I, all the way up to the start of World War II. We call this period of time the interwar years because they happened between the two big wars of the early 20th century, World War I and World War II. So we are now making our way through this time period and talking about what happens in the 1920s and the 1930s that eventually sets Europe down the path towards another even more devastating war than the one that they had just gotten done fighting in World War I in 1919. Now, one of the things that we learned about when we came to the end of our World War I unit, just to remind you, is we talked about the Paris Peace Conference, the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles was the peace that was negotiated after World War I. And you might remember me telling you last semester about how President Woodrow Wilson of the United States came up with those 14 points, his plan for a post-World War I peace that he brought over to the Paris Peace Conference, which took place at the Palace of Versailles, same place that Louis XVI had been taken out of power hundreds of years earlier, okay? 150 years earlier, all right? They hold this peace conference there. But you might remember one of the things about the peace, or the Treaty of Versailles, was that it was written mostly by the victors. They didn't even invite Germany to participate in the peace talks. And because they didn't invite Germany to participate, they end up using that as an opportunity to essentially just punish Germany. And one of the things that they did was they passed that one clause, I think it's Article 231 of the Treaty of Versailles. It's also known as the War Guilt Clause. You may remember learning about that. And what the War Guilt Clause did was it placed 100% of the fault of World War I on Germany. And it enforced demands on Germany to pay for the war. They essentially take the entire bill for World War I for all of the Allied powers, and they say, here you go, Germany, you can pay this because it's your fault that the war happened in the first place. Because remember that Germany had been the one that basically said to Austria-Hungary at the start of the war, no matter what you decide to do, we have your back. And so the Allied nations very much felt that Germany was the one that proliferated the war unnecessarily, widened it, took the war to the Western Front, and they are angry about that. Not to mention, after 5 years of war, remember, the nations yes, they blamed them. That's correct. Not to mention, remember, guys, the war had resulted in absolute devastation rather, for France in particular, because most of the Western Front was fought on French lands, right in the eastern part of France. Okay, there was tremendous amounts of destruction to the French countryside. And remember the loss of life, okay? World War I ended up being a cost of somewhere in the area of about 10 million people dying as a result of warfare. And then too, don't forget that they had the Spanish flu pandemic that took place at that time. Imagine COVID happening, okay, except for in a time where they don't have vaccine technology. They don't have the technology of simple things like penicillin even at this point. Okay, not that penicillin would help with the Spanish flu, because the Spanish flu is a virus, not a bacteria, but it doesn't, that's beside the point. The point is to say this pandemic happens in a very, in a time when medical understandings were very primitive, okay? They really had a very, very, very limited understanding of, germs and how, microbes work and all of that other stuff. They've got some idea of it, but, the technology is still at this time very, very primitive. And Arnav, that's what all vaccines do. All vaccines are dead viruses that you are injected with so that your body attacks them, learns how to fight them, and you become immune because your body builds up permanent antibodies against that virus. That's how all vaccines work. So, but vaccines, people always try and, trash vaccines. I don't know why there's such a movement about that. Because if we're really looking at the facts, we wouldn't even be able to estimate how many lives have been saved as a result of vaccines, because people never got sick in the first place. How can you measure something? How can you measure how many lives were saved if you don't even know how many people would have otherwise gotten sick had they not been vaccinated? Countless people over the course of the last century would have died of things like polio, or been permanently crippled by it, or would have died from smallpox, or measles, or MMR, or whatever, okay? Countless. We're talking in the number of billions of lives over the course of the last century have been saved as a result of people getting vaccinated. That's luck, though, Arnav. Just because you take a flu shot and you don't have a flu shot and you don't get the flu doesn't mean anything, okay? That just is luck, all right? So, yeah. Usually a vaccine is either dead or extremely weak viruses, okay, that they inject into you, and your body learns how to attack it. Yes, and you're absolutely right, actually. There were extremely strict standards during the Spanish flu pandemic where people were wearing masks out to public gatherings and stuff, and you absolutely could have been put in jail, in some places at least. for not wearing a mask because it was so deadly. People understood you're doing a public service by not spreading. The mask isn't to stop you from getting it. The mask is to stop you from spreading it. Okay, that's why people wear masks. It's so that when you cough and you sneeze or you wipe your face or whatever, that you're not getting everything else disgusting around you filled with more germs. Okay, so that's why everybody has to wear masks. Otherwise, it doesn't work. If only one person wears a mask, the virus is still going to spread. Everybody has to do their part, and they knew that, and they knew that then, and they know that now. So there's no reason not to look out for the public interest. Why would anyone not want to wear a mask? It's foolish. Okay, it's absolutely foolish. It's not a political statement. It has nothing to do with politics. It has everything to do with the general will of the people. Okay, as human beings, we're supposed to be civilized and look out for other human beings. Why would you deliberately go out and try and get other people sick? It's foolish. Why would you go out and start smashing people's cars? Same thing. Dumb. Why would you? It's destructive. Okay? So why would you spread an illness that you know is deadly? It makes no sense. It's not a political statement. It's just, it is what it is. It's science. Okay? So anyhow, I'm going to get off my soapbox there. The chance of dying from the vaccine, probably 0.0001% or some ridiculously low number like that. Vaccines, the worst thing that can happen with vaccines is that sometimes people have allergic reactions to them, but they're very rare. Okay, they're very, very rare. And your chances of getting autism from a vaccine are zero because that whole thing was made up. Okay, so, and the doctor got disbarred who made up the study back in the late 90s, early 2000s. Okay, that whole thing has been completely debunked for a decade or more. So, again, there's so much misinformation that spreads out, but people just want to cling on to whatever sounds catchy without even looking at the data. It's foolish. I'll give you one thing. Look this up. Why would I lie to you? I don't, I have no interest in lying to you. What would be the point of it? Okay, look this up. The number of kids on the CDC website, Center for Disease Control, okay, on the CDC website, the kids versus the kids who are vaccinated versus the kids who are not vaccinated, okay, the ones who are not vaccinated die at tremendously high numbers from all sorts of completely preventable illnesses. You know, it's just, I don't know what to tell you about. It's just that is what the facts are. So anyhow, all right, let's move on because I have other things. I really don't want to talk about vaccinations. That's not what I wanted to talk about today. I want to talk about the interwar years. So we need to talk about a couple of things, okay? And we'll get into the PowerPoint, but because I have such a short class today with you, I really would rather just spend the time kind of trying to describe this era to you, okay? So hey, folks in the chat, I know you guys are very interested in talking about all this, and I appreciate that, but we do need to get back onto topic here, okay? So let's just leave aside the vaccination conversation, okay? Let's get back on track. All right, so, and so here we go. That is enough, let's focus. All right, here we go. So, kids, interwar years. All right, history time. Interwar years. After the war, one of the last things that I showed you on the PowerPoint at the end of last semester were two maps. I don't know if you remember this, okay? Two maps. One is of what Europe looked like before World War I started. One is what Europe looks like after World War I ends, okay? When World War I ends, remember that that's the end of a number of different dynasties in Europe. The Romanov dynasty, who we just talked about, Nicholas II, okay? The Tsar of Russia. There is no Romanov dynasty after World War I anymore. The Kaiser, of Germany, okay? The king, essentially the king of Germany, right? The emperor of Germany. Kaiser Wilhelm II was his name, if you remember. Kaiser Wilhelm II was part of the Hohenzollern dynasty, okay? They're gone. World War I, end of it. The Ottoman Empire, gone. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, gone, okay? And because these empires collapse at the end of World War I, all right, there is now this new global political structure formed in Europe where there are new borders drawn, there are new nations, new governments set up, okay? And one of those places that needs to set up a new government because their entire dynasty fell is Germany. When Germany's dynasty falls and they lose World War I, all right, they create a brand new democratic government in Germany. Now, one of the things that we need to be clear about talking about this new democratic government that got founded in Germany, the name of it is called the Weimar Republic. I'm going to type it in the chat here. Okay, the Weimar Republic. That, I know it looks like Weimar, but it's W's are pronounced as V's in German. So Weimar Republic, okay? The Weimar Republic is essentially Germany's first experiment ever with a democratic parliamentary style government. Now here in America, okay, here in America, our legislative branch, the lawmaking branch of our government, is known as Congress, okay? Congress is divided into two houses. The House of Representatives is the lower house, the Senate is the upper house. In England, their lawmaking body, their legislative branch, is known as Parliament. They also have two houses, a lower house and an upper house. The House of the lower house is the House of Commons, and the upper house is the House of Lords. Okay, that's their body. In Germany, after World War I, for the first time ever, they create a very, very similar style of government. Okay, that's going to be democratically run with a new constitution. Okay, this government, the Weimar Republic, their legislative branch has a name as well. They call it the Reichstag. Okay, the Reichstag. I'll type that in here. Okay, okay, and they also have two houses. Okay, and they are known as the Bundesrat and the now I'm going to forget the other one because they're German. Bundestag. Bundesrat. Okay, I was right. All right, I just wanted to make sure before I told you the wrong thing. The Bundesrat is the lower one, and the Bundestag is the upper house. Okay, so this is going to be their new legislative government over there. However, because Germany doesn't have a long history with a democratic tradition, okay, Germany had been ruled for a very long time by various emperors or kings, okay, going back to the Holy Roman Empire days way back in the 15, 16, 1700s. And then by the time that we get to the 1800s, Germany unifies into a single nation state still under the control of an absolute monarch in Wilhelm II. After World War I, they get rid of that. They institute a democratically styled government, but it's their first one ever. It's a little fledgling baby bird democracy that's just barely taking its first flight out of the nest. And usually when birds take their first flight out of the nest, there's a couple of hairy moments where they fall to the earth. Okay? And this is going to be the case for Germany. Germany's democratic government opens the door for many, 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 many different political parties to throw their hat into government and try and pass laws that will address the needs of Germany. And there's going to be a lot of needs of Germany right after World War I. They lost the war, okay, number one. Number two, they've now been, charged for the entire war. They've been billed to pay for the entire war. This is going to have dire economic consequences on Germany, okay, because they're going to have to pay through the war with both money and with resources. All right, so Germany is going to be, they had to surrender some of their lands. They had to demilitarize. Germany is going to be an absolute mess from 1919 to about 1924. The first 5 years after World War I ends, Germany just has constant problems, headaches that they have to deal with. The reason I bring this up is because when you have, here in the United States, think about it, we have a two-party system. There's basically two political parties, and think about how, just with two parties, how much they argue with one another. The two parties constantly fight with one another, bicker over issues. They have to compromise in order to get things passed. Democracy is hard. Democracy is a difficult form of government, okay? Winston Churchill, whose name you may have heard before. Winston Churchill was the Prime Minister of Britain during World War II. And Winston Churchill was once famously quoted as saying, democracy is the worst form of government except for all those others which have been tried. And it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek, sarcastic comment, because basically what he's saying is democracy is miserable. Democracy is hard, okay? Democracy causes people to have to fight. It causes conflict. It forces people to compromise. And it forces you to have to listen to all sorts of different ideas, many of which you may not agree with. In Germany, because they have so many different political parties that have entered into the Weimar Republic, you are now faced not with a two-party system, but with a multi-party system where everybody has different ideas, different beliefs about the direction that Germany should go now that World War I is over. This causes tremendous conflict, and it makes it so that the Weimar Republic has a really, really hard time resolving problems in a timely fashion because of all of the bickering and arguing and compromise that democracy forces people to have to engage in. Germany is looking for quick solutions to their problems, not solutions that take years and years and years of lawmaking and compromise and arguing and elections and so on, okay? And because of this, because of these conflicts that Germany is going through, we are going to see a pathway open up for strongmen like Hitler, for example, to take advantage of the weaknesses of their brand new baby bird democracy, exploit those weaknesses, start using propaganda, terror attacks against the government, discriminatory laws, and so on to subdue the population, subdue democracy, and have a powerful dictatorial type figure take control of the state. It also allowed for people who had been big figures during World War I, military figures, guys like Ludendorff, Guys like Paul von Hindenburg, who were generals in World War I that should have been completely discredited after the war. Their careers should have been over. They should have never been able to have a role in government. But because of the weakness of the system, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of anxiety that the people of Germany have. And they're looking for somebody to take control. And so who do they turn to but some of these people that otherwise should have been completely discredited? And Paul von Hindenburg finds himself at the top of the brand new democratic system. Now, to his credit, Paul von Hindenburg absolutely hated Adolf Hitler. But Paul von Hindenburg, by the time that Hitler comes to power, Hindenburg is a very elderly man. He's in his 80s, I think. And he's also going through like dementia. So his brain's not working exactly right anymore. And Hitler exploits that. He exploits a lot of different avenues, okay, to essentially create chaos in Germany. Make the situation even worse, which convinces people we need someone who will fix this chaos and restore order. And that's the real danger. That's the real danger about people like Adolf Hitler who, you know, during this time, during the age of anxiety that we're talking about, this interwar year period, guys like Hitler, guys like Mussolini in Italy, guys like Joseph Stalin in Russia, guys like Mao Zedong over in China, and so on. They use these, they deliberately try to stoke chaos. They try to create more problems than actually exist, precisely because by making problems that don't exist, like for example in Germany, the problem that Hitler created that really wasn't a problem was all of this nonsense about Jewish folks living in Germany. Jewish people made up less than 1% of the population in Germany, okay? They were not at all a threat to the stability of Germany or the well-being of the German economy, okay? But Hitler, because the people are already so fearful, because they're already so anxious, they believe these lies that they're told, and they say, well, without him, look what's going to happen. You know, we're going to have a German state that's not pure and all of this other stuff. And all of it was based on complete blarney, okay? Hitler and all of his studies about eugenics has since been completely discredited. But because it sounded real, because it sounded scientific, people believed it. And they went along with it. And there were, for years afterwards, studies, psychological studies done, sociological studies done on societies of how could people be so easily manipulated. But they were. Yes, Arnav, 100%, 100%. Yes, you just characterized it perfectly there. Fake problem, then reaction, then solution, which is actually dangerous, okay? And of course the danger is when these people who are these totalitarian, dictatorial types of leaders who crave just this insatiable craving for power, okay? Of course, when they come to power, the very first thing that they do is they get rid of the freedoms that people had. They get rid of the good elements of society in the name of security and safety, law and order, and things like that. They start using secret police to get rid of their political adversaries. They start stoking riots. Hitler himself encouraged his own party to basically go and burn down the Reichstag, which was the building that I just told you about that all the laws were being made in. It's the same as the Capitol riots. Okay? Basically, Hitler then turned around and said it wasn't the fascists that did it, it was the communists. Yet another example of creating a problem that was just fake. He just lied to people, but because they wanted to believe him, they did. And it allows him to gain more and more and more and more power over time. But alas, I have exhausted my time with you. So we will pick this up. I know I didn't even get to the PowerPoint today, but I will be talking more about this as we move throughout the rest of this unit, and we'll start in with the PowerPoint when we come back next week. I do believe we have a 3-day weekend this weekend, so I think the next time that I'll see you is on Wednesday. But until then, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and enjoy your weekend, and we will see you back next week for more Interwar Years history. Have a good one.